Barakah Halal, Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushua. Double honors to the apostles and elders in Great Millstone. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect and one-third out there, preaching and living this truth in all sincerity. Brother Obadiah here again with another quick hit. Just want to go into these Ishmaelites and how they went about putting Jake in slavery prior to the transatlantic slave trade. I know majority of the people know about, the West African slave trade, but there was a slave trade going on about a millennia before, starting in around the 800s, ending in the 1900s, so roughly 1,000 years, with those Ishmaelites and those Hamites putting Jake in slavery and sending them over, to those Arab nations in Asia, known as the Arab slave trade. So we're going to get on Ishmael and Ham and let them know what their judgment is going to be for, touching the apple of the Lord's eye. So we're going to go into a little history behind it. I'll put a couple of links in the description box so you brothers can look up this, little pieces of information that I did my research on. Okay. I'm going to read here from the original people.org about the Arab slave trade. By some calculations, the number of victims of the 14 centuries of Muslim slave trade could exceed 180 million, which could definitely be more than that. Nearly 100 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in America, and 130 years after all slaves with the British Empire were set so-called free by parliamentary decree, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, Ishmael, in 1962, and Mauritania, which is a sub-Saharan, African nation, in 1980, begrudgingly removed legalized slavery from their statute books. And this is only after international pressure was brought to bear. Today, numerous of international organizations document that slavery still continues in some Muslim countries, which is true. I'm going to read up here a bit, give you a little history here. While almost all slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines and harems and for military service. So Ishmael was, freaking off on our women, man. That's what the bulk of the slaves were in that day, women, so they can have their harems. While many children were born to slaves in the Americas, and millions of their descendants are citizens in Brazil and the U.S. to this day, very few descendants of the slaves that ended up in the Middle East survive. While most slaves went to the Americas could marry and have families, most of the male slaves destined for the Middle East were castrated, and most of the children were born to the women were killed at birth. And the ones that they had by Ishmael, they kept them, because that's their line. So I'm going to give you a little example of, what the men and the young men went through when they castrated them. Okay. Victims from raids and wars were subjected to horrid, monstrous, inhumane process of castration without anesthesia, which had a 60% mortality. To stop the bleeding, hot coals were cast into the naked womb, which was followed by the most blood-curdling alien scream a human could make. If a child survived the brutal act, there was to be a life of influence and luxury, so-called, in which their jobs were pretty much to look over the harems. So you got this older man or young man with their rod cut off, taking their manhood, and they put a hot coal on the womb after they cut the rod off, man. I mean, could you imagine that? I mean, it's pretty graphic, but this is what Ishmael was doing to our people, man. To our men. That's why there's not a big remnant over there, being though they, sent hundreds of millions of our people over there. But again, most of them were women, for their harems, for their personal pleasure, so to speak. Okay. Going back in this other article, while the mortality rate for slaves being transported across the Atlantic was as high as 10%, The percentage of slaves dying in the Trans-Sahara and East African slave trade was between 80 and 90%. That's a lot of people dying, just to get to their destination. While most of the, while almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation, concubines, and harems, and for military service, which I just read. Excuse me for that. Okay, we're going to read on down here just a little bit more. All right. That's pretty much it on it as far as a quick history. And again, this has lasted about a whole millennium, so a little bit over 1,000 years, as compared to the Atlantic slave trade was roughly about 400 years. So, Ishmael, Ham, y'all did a lot of damage, but it's all through the spirit that it happened. That's part of our punishment. We understand that. That doesn't mean necessarily we have to like it, but we definitely got to bring it to light, and we're not going to forget that past. You all going to have to pay for it. So I'm going to give you a couple of quick Bible verses to let you know what your judgment is going to be. But first, let's just, put everything in hindsight that this was all orchestrated by the heathen nations. I'm going to start with Psalms 83. I'm going to read one. I'm going to read the whole chapter. A song or psalm or Asaph. Keep not thy silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O Yahweh. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and that they hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, let us cut them off for being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent, Ham, Ishmael. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gabal, and Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assur also is joined with them. They have whole open the children of Lot, Salah. Do unto them unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeb, yea, all they princes as Zeb and as Zalmunna, who said, Let us take ourselves the houses of Yahweh in possession. O my Yahweh, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind. As the fire burneth wood, and as the flame setteth the mountain on fire. So persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Yahweh. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish. That men may know that thou, whose name alone is Yahweh, are the most high all over the earth. Yahweh, excuse me. Next verse, Revelations 13. I'm going to read 9 and 10. This is going to be your judgment, Ishmael and Ham, for doing what you did. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And we all know the saints are the Israelites, per the scriptures and Psalms. Okay? So Ishmael, Ham, you got a heavy, bill to pay. We're going to put hell on you in the kingdom. All right? And this also goes out to these 2/3 Kemetic niggas out there that's into this Islam. How can you, worship a religion that put your people through this type of predicament for over 1,000 years? You dumbass niggas. You matter of fact, stay in that religion. Somebody got to be the 2/3, and that just makes my chances of being of the elect and 1/3 go up even higher. So more you niggas, you dumb niggas, go into that madness. Without doing your history. All this was done under the banner of Islam over those 1,000 years. Raping your women, having heathen kids. The men that did survive it, cut their rods off. Put them through total hell. So think about that, Mr. Comedic Man. So I hope all you brothers were edified. Shalom.